On tonight's show, we'll cover our special strategies for the final 2 weeks of the fantasy season. We'll also share some early takeaways for the 2024 baseball and fantasy season. Ray Murphy of Baseball HQ joins us next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. I heard your softball team won the championship. Congrats, man.
Thanks. They won it last night, and they actually had it in one of the billboards here near where I live, which is really cool.
It was on a billboard?
Yes, the team picture was on a billboard near my area because the brother of a guy on our team owns a billboard, so he put it up.
Wow, that's pretty freaking cool. I've never had my picture on that kind of billboard there, but our team, we are in the semifinals of my Sunday league. We played our semifinal game last night of our night league, and it's 7-inning league. It went to the 10th inning, 0-0, and the lights went out. So top of the 11th, 0-0 tie. I did my job. Our offense did not, apparently. And what are you going to do?
Well, in our league that we won, our pitcher pitched a shutout in the championship game. It was tied 1-1 in the series, and he pitched a shutout. And the team won. Our team won 5-0. I didn't play because I'm still recovering from a foot injury. I did have a stress fracture in my foot, but the team played without me and did well.
Nice. All right, well, congrats there. And we've got a fantastic show today. We're going to talk about the final 2 weeks of the season, some strategy of what to do, and we got a fantastic guest. You know him, he's the co-general manager of Baseball HQ. Welcome back to the show, Ray Murphy. How are you, Ray?
I'm great. For a minute, I thought I was on the wrong podcast, but I'm glad to hear I'm actually in the right room after all.
Yeah, yes, you are here, and excited as I'm sure you're getting ready for first pitch in Arizona. I know there's going to be a lot of great people there. James Anderson will be there. Eno Saris, Ron Chandler, Paul Sporer, yourself, of course. What's going on? How's the prep for first pitch going?
It's coming along nicely. It always comes super quickly as we get to the end of the season here. We will all be together in Arizona 7 weeks from today. So we've got some work to do to put the details of that together. We're actually well down the road of it. If you visit our site at Baseball HQ and navigate on the top menu to First Pitch Arizona, you can see the program as it's taking shape there. We're starting to drop some specific sessions and programs onto the schedule. We've got the podcast room schedule nearly baked. I know you guys will be appearing there, and we're starting to fill in the blanks. I was on a call with the folks in the AFL office who help us out with some of our events at the ballparks and our tickets and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of logistics to cover, but the next 7 weeks will be gone in the blink of an eye, and we will all be immersed in the best weekend of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And if you haven't been to first pitch, I highly recommend it. Once you go, you don't not go. It's just so fantastic. Just a whole weekend plus of baseball talk, fantasy talk, get to see prospects. Personally, I'll be doing an Excel workshop. If you wanted to know the ins and outs of how you can do Excel and its connection with fantasy baseball and a couple of tips and tricks, I'll be doing that there, so join me as I participate on that one, among other things. As you mentioned, the podcast, and I'm in another session or two, so definitely join us there.
And you get to mingle with the fantasy baseball community while you're there. That's a big thing there also.
Absolutely. So a lot of fun. Can't wait to be there. Hey, Ray, how are you doing in your leagues? We've got almost two plus weeks to go in the season.
Yeah, I'm sitting here clicking on some live standings as we talk here. It's a mixed bag, of course. Luckily, all of my leagues are not represented by the one we're in together, Ariel, since labor mixed is you're in the battle at the top and I'm down in 11th out of 12. But luckily, that's one of my worst leagues, but not representative of all of them this year.
Oh,
So
good, good, good.
yeah, there are some that are going better than that, thankfully. So yeah, I'm clicking around, and a lot of stuff still in doubt in these last 2 weeks, and that's kind of all you can ask for.
Yeah, no doubt. The one we're in, which I believe you won last year, mixed labor. I'm literally bouncing a half a point within first. I've taken over first and back and forth over the last week with Justin Mason and Gray Albright. Looking at the standings here, I've got a lot of points to gain, so pretty quickly. So I actually expect to prop up to first place by the end of the week, and you never know. We can hold it. And as we're talking before the show, the last week of the season, there's often some quirks, which actually is going to be the topic of our day today, as we're talking about the final 2 weeks of the season. And it really is a different strategy than the beginning of the season. The beginning of the season, you're just looking to get the best guys. You're sorting things sort itself out. Sometimes you have a plethora of one quantity, and maybe you have a little bit less than the other, but you're going for value. And as the year goes on, you sort of pick up some waiver wire guys to fill in holes. You make trades. But in the last week of the season, it's really just going for it. I mean, if you're up by big in stolen bases, you're not going to even focus on stolen bases. You might be sitting Ellie De La Cruz in the last week, if that makes sense. Is there any case, Ray, where you would ever sit Ellie De La Cruz?
I mean, such a broad-based contributor like that who can hit any one of the 5 categories, it seems like he would be part of what you're trying to do in any category. I guess if there were some mythical league where I was running away with all the counting stats and trying to protect a batting average point or two, maybe I would sit Ellie, but that would be really only in the extreme case where I was choosing to not play people at all and trying to actually minimize my playing time. I can't say I've actually ever been in that situation, but that's the only hypothetical I can conjure on a moment's thought here.
But maybe like a Bryce Terang, that you might want to
Sure,
sit,
totally.
Right?
Bryce Terang, maybe even C.J. Abrams.
Yeah, exactly. So weird things come up. So the first question out to you, Ray, is how much should you be churning your roster in the final 2 weeks of the season? Now, obviously, during the season, you don't want to get rid of players who could be useful later, but when there is no later, only 1 week left or 2 weeks left, the opportunity cost is no longer there. So, how much should one be churning their roster?
Mercilessly. Anybody is eligible to be cut. Anybody, at this point who is, if it happens to be the weekend or you're near your transaction deadline and someone is day-to-day or questionable for a couple of days or is a platooner who has a streak of bad platoon games coming up and looks like they might only play halftime in the next week, throw them off the side of the boat, go get somebody who can play more, as we started to allude to earlier, playing time is generally king at this time of year. It's a little bit easier now that we don't have the full roster expansion we used to have. It used to be when we had wild September roster expansion that by the time you got the last week of the season, there were all these September call-ups playing and lineups that were not even recognizable. Now with the reduced September call-ups, somebody on a 28-man roster still has to play, and some of them you've heard of. So the distribution of playing time is not quite as fractured, but week over week in September, it still gets harder and harder to find playing time. And the best thing you can do, generally speaking, it gets into specific categories, but the best thing you can do, generally speaking, is find as much playing time as you can. So anybody who looks like they have an obstacle to playing time, throw them off the side of the boat and find somebody who's going to be in the lineup more times in the coming week.
Ruvain?
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to echo what Ray said a little bit here, because yes, everyone is able to be dropped. I don't think anyone is safe. Basically, in my roster, I'm looking at I need my best lineup out there, no matter what. The last 2 weeks of the season, you may want to think about dropping a closer if you have too many saves, and let the field try to spend money on the rest of their fab on the closers out there if you don't need them, something like that. If you see a player has only one more start left or 2 more starts left, and then they're talking about shutting him down, or even a hint of an injury, all these things, these are reasons why you should have keep churning your roster. But it also depends on how much fab you have. You shouldn't use all your fab the rest you have this week or next week. You need to save it for the last week of the season also. So you have to make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind. Also that you want to have a good balance and have the guy have as much playing time as possible in your lineup. But at the same point, you have to have a balance where you're not spending all your fab this week and saving just enough from last week for break glass in case of emergency type thing.
So you mentioned playing time, and one thing I've paid attention to over the years is real life MLB standings and teams that are battling for a playoff spot. Because playing time is key. You know that if a team is in the hunt, have to defend itself, they're going to play every starter all the way to the end. I remember that I once started in the last week of the season Gary Sheffield over whoever I had, just because there was a possibility that he would play a game 163 or game 164 also. And I remember because he played 2 extra games and he stole 2-3 extra bases that week, I actually moved up in the standing before of it. So playing time is pretty key. And I would say, though, that especially the pitchers, pitchers are more fickle in the last week of the season. But if you're on a team, let's say the Mets, for example, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, you can bet they're going to go till the very end. The Mets may not wrap up a playoff spot or be out of it till the last weekend. So they're not going to be cut. But if you're in Pittsburgh, I don't know, is Paul Skeens going to pitch the last game of the season? Is Jared Jones going to pitch? Maybe not. So, Ray, how much do you take into account the actual playoff standing?
I think you've got it right. I think it matters a lot more for pitchers for the reason you said, and it can even be a little more subtle than will Skeens or Jared Jones get scratched from their last start while a Quintana or a Manaea is going to keep pitching because the Mets need him to pitch. There's also, especially as we get into these last couple of weeks, the starts that are going to get shorted, right? I mean, to be fair, if you're the White Sox and Garrett Crochet, his starts have been getting shorted since July 1st. But what we're seeing happen with Crochet will start happening to a lot more pitchers in the last week, in the last 2 weeks. We might see Skeens, even if he doesn't get scratched for his last start or two, he might go out there and throw 50 pitches or 3 innings. And that's not helping you if you're trying to accumulate wins or strikeouts, where you'd much rather have somebody who's not as talented as Skeens, but Quintana or a Manaea, who is more likely to go 5 2/3 and strike out 5 and be eligible for a win if things go well. It depends on what categories you're chasing, but if you're worried on the pitching side, if you're worried more about the wins and strikeouts, then volume still matters. And you're right that bad teams, young pitchers, even if they've been very good, are very likely to kind of turtle up and not add much value from here out.
Yeah, and you can't really paint a broad brush. I mean, we can only give you on the show here the strategies and ideas. It's always going to be case dependent. And you need to look at your own team's categories and say, wins, how valuable is that to me? Well, look, 3 wins gains me 4 points. Well, then in that case, Sean Manaea versus Paul Skeens, you're going to pitch Sean Manaea, right? If we're talking just pure strikeouts, you've got a little bit tougher decision, if the strikeouts are more bunched, because Skeens can probably strike out more in the limited time that he would pitch. So it really has to be looked at on a team-by-team basis. We can't tell you exactly what's going to be on your team. We can only give you the concepts. Ruvain?
There's one other thing I want to add. If you think your starting pitcher is not going to go a full 5 innings and possibly get you a win, you may not want to pick them up on the waiver wire, number one. Number two, you should look at the teams that are in the playoff hunt. Look how they're using their bullpen. You may decide to pick up a guy from the bullpen on a team that's in it. They have a chance of vulturing a win here and there. Their ERA and whip may help you, and they may somehow get a save out of it also. You never know. So these middle relievers on teams that are in contention, they may actually have a little bit more value. They might not get as many strikeouts as a starter, but if you need a win, and let's say you're following a team like you mentioned the Mets, so you can talk about possibly getting a Reed Garrett or a pitcher of that type, or a Jose Butto if he's available, or something like that, because you know that they're going to be pitching in the innings where leads may change, and you may be able to vulture a win or a save or even a couple of strikeouts out of it.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that over the years, maybe 6 years ago, you would look and you would get as many 2-star pitchers that last week, and you would just try to pile in just in case you get a win. I don't think that's the case these days. If you're fighting for wins, you're right. It may not be good to select one of those guys. You might be at a loss because they might go 4 innings and 4 innings, which does not help you. You might be better off padding your ERA a little bit more and getting those vulture win guys in the middle. Definitely a good point. Moving right back to you, what about taking a stash on an injured player that might be returning? So we're talking about like an Ozzy Albies who might come back for the last week. Is that worth taking a stash on now for the miss a week, but he'll play the last week and, throw away some guy who's underperforming on your team to do that?
Well, I think it really depends on what you think you're going to get out of him. If you think you're going to get out the full 100% of Ozzy Albies the last week of the season without much of a rehab assignment, coming off of an injury and he hasn't played in a couple of weeks, look what you're getting right now from Anthony Rizzo. He only had a handful of rehab games, and now he's not hitting at all. And if you have him in your lineup, he's actually more of a detriment than anything else. So players coming back for injury the last week of the season, especially on teams that need him in, like, quote unquote need him in the lineup, they're not necessarily the best guys to go after because they may be rusty. You may not get the full 100% player. They may be coming back maybe a little bit too early just because the team needs them back.
Yeah. Ray, what is the bar for you for dropping players? Maybe injured players on your team or underperforming players. Maybe they were a 7th round pick, but they're underperforming now. Like, how high or low does the bar have to be for you to say, you know what, last 2 weeks we got to cut them?
I don't care what round somebody was drafted in. I don't care what I paid for them at the draft table. I don't care how much I fabbed them for whenever it was. I can give you a concrete example. One of my leagues, I had Gabriel Moreno, and when he got hurt last month, I picked up Adrian Del Castillo, which for a couple of weeks was great. But then he seemed to go cold and was like 0 for 12 or 1 for 15 or something last week. And I was looking at that last Sunday night, and I said, nope, he's got to go. And I swapped him out, looked at the catcher pool, found a couple of guys who I thought would be better from being upgraded to the position. So I ended up with Pedro Paez instead in a for a couple of bucks in fab. And it's all about riding the hot hand, and it's not like I paid a lot for Del Castillo or was, I don't bring that up because I had a particular sunk cost with him or anything, but only because even though 2 weeks earlier I had been very happy to have him, as soon as it's like they could go fast as soon as like an avocado getting cut open and turning brown, right? As soon as I start seeing them going a little overripe, or I think I've gotten the best part of value out of them, it's time to move on to the next piece of fruit.
Hey, curious for you, how much do you pay attention in your decisions for picking up players in the last 2 weeks of the season? How much of your decision is based on year-to-date stats versus last 15, 30 days, like the hot hand, versus you get out of what you would see in projections?
I'm not looking at projections much anymore because those are based on full season stats and expectations for the beginning of the season, that sort of thing. I will look at projected playing time because for all the reasons we're citing here, I think how often the guy is going to play is important. But projected playing time and, yes, recent performance, and you can tell me, depending on what my stat site offers, last 21, last 30, last month, last 4 weeks, whatever. Something in that range, I think, gives me the kind of information I need about what I could expect for the 2 weeks ahead.
Is that what you do, Ruben?
Yeah, I'm looking at bats for like the past 2 weeks. I'm looking at appearances for the last 2 weeks. That's the type of thing I'm looking for. I'm looking to see if they're gonna. Projections they're done already. Year to season stats, I'm only looking if I'm considering picking up a guy that I wouldn't necessarily even think about picking up. I'll say, this guy's been hitting for the last 2 weeks, but overall he's not doing that well. Then I'll do a little bit of dive into how he's doing, last 2-3 months, and then you look at the last 2-3 weeks because you want the hot hand, but you don't want a guy who runs hot and cold, or hot and cold, and you're getting him for the tail end of the hot, and you're stuck with the cold.
Yeah, no, I'm also like you guys. I will look at recent performance, and you're right. You have to do a little bit of a deep dive if it's a choice between two players. By the way, if we had Derek Carty on the show, he would actually say, "Nah, just go by projections." He actually will say that. He'll say, no, my our projections take into account everything. But I like getting in within the last 2 weeks of the season. I do shy away from projections myself in practice. I really do look at the hot hand because baseball is about momentum. I'll also look at matchups, going into the next week, who's playing who. I think that factors a lot for me as well. I want to talk about, especially in roto leagues now, because it's about gaining points versus even defending points, right? It's if you can see that, hey, I've got 3 points to gain in RBIs. I've got 2 points to lose in stolen bases. The question is, what is the balance between them? Or is there a difference, right? Is a gain point the same as a lost point? If you're looking at where to bolster your category, should I pick up a guy who's really good in steals versus power? Where do you put it? Do you put it where the categories are tight? Do you put it where you're ahead, where you're defending? How do you work that, Ray?
Yeah, it depends. And the top line consideration is always what are the overall standings, right? Like take your labor league where the difference is a half point. That doesn't matter so much, when it's changing hour to hour. But it is a little bit of a different lens if you're, say, starting your analysis from I'm 3 points up versus I'm 3 points down. What I actually like to do is actually look at my own team and the team I'm chasing or the team that is chasing me, assuming a two-team race, and try to do like a reasonable plus minus projection. Like I've got 6 points of upside and 8 points of downside. The other guy might have less. He might be trading in some more narrow ranges, and maybe he's only got 3 points of upside and 4 points of downside or something like that. But if you take that kind of math, it sort of gives you a range of points you're potentially moving around in and a range of points your primary opponent is moving around in. And then based on those ranges and where you sit in the range, it starts to give you a little bit of an answer to that question you're asking, Ariel, which is, am I going more on offense or more on defense? If you look at your opponent and you say, yeah, he can only get anything more than 2 or 3 points if he really maxes out some ranges, then maybe you don't have to chase all of your upside quite aggressively. Maybe you play a little more defense. But the opposite could be true too if you're trying to run somebody down.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget to look at how things have progressed over the last 2, 3 weeks. Like you might be very tight in saves, but it's perhaps you've gained in the past 2, 3 weeks a lot of points or a lot of saves on everybody else, and your trajectory is going to take you up there. So you don't have to keep fortifying it as aggressively as you have been because it's sort of trending that way. Whereas another category, maybe it's trending down and you sort of got to put the pedal on the metal that way to defend a point. You might have to do that. So not just looking at your current team, but look how it's trended over the past couple of weeks, and also look how your team is projected. And if you just lost a player to injury, that's going to shift things up. So there's a couple of things to look at. But again, my overall point that I've made for the last couple of years is it's less on where you can gain points and more on where the marginal points are. If it's tight in a category, whether you're up or down or in the middle of it, that's where you need to fortify more than, I can gain a point if I get 15 homers. Well, I mean, that's not going to say anything. I'd rather defend the point where, I can't gain anything in stolen bases, but I can lose a couple if I don't have stolen bases. And everyone is chasing me, and they're 1 or 2 away, right? Stolen bases are more important there. It matters what the marginal drop is between you and the other people are.
There's actually one other aspect that you didn't mention is that if you're chasing certain points in a certain category, who are you chasing? Are they still playing? Have they checked out already? Are they doing fantasy football only? Who's chasing you? Are they in it also? Or are you just having a cold streak and the team behind you just happens to be catching up? So you have to take that into account also. Where are you trying to gain points? Who you're gaining it from? Who you're losing it from? Not just the teams who are ahead of you in the standings, but where you're getting these points from.
Yeah, and also to that, take a look where the team that you're chasing or the team that's chasing you, how they are in relation to those teams have checked out. Like if you go to the NFBC, there's going to be teams at the bottom that have checked out. We know that. Either they're doing other leagues or they're doing football or whatever. So if your opponent is chasing some of those teams, they can quickly gain points on you in those categories. So it's not just you. See where those teams that have disappeared are in relation to the team that you're personally battling.
And just to pile one more thing onto all of this, the other thing you've obviously got to pay attention to is where are the category battles where you are in direct competition with that primary competitor? Where are the 2 point flips? If you've got a couple of those that you can win, A, you've got to prioritize those, and B, that might make the actual standing situation somewhat deceptive. If you might be a point behind, but if you've got 3 points you can flip on them, you only need 2 out of 3 of those to flip the situation. And if they're right there, that's an instant tie. So that will also guide you into where you want to make your lineup decisions for those category impacts.
Right. Like in labor, I'm right behind Gray Albright in whip. Well, that's not a 1 point swing. That's a 2 point swing. So your emphasis on the category is obviously going to be dependent on it. A question about we're talking about this in the last 2 weeks. Should we be doing this kind of analysis for the past month, for the last month of the season, last 2 months? Like, Ray, when do you flip on the switch and say, you know what, I'm not going to focus on overall value. I'm going to now focus on the categories, really specifically starting when? Like, when do you flip that switch?
I think the tendency is to flip it too early. I think there's a point, there's so much that can change. The problem is that categories that you think are stable in June and July, even in August, aren't really stable. And as you were saying 2 minutes ago, the recent trends matter so much. You'd be surprised if you went back and looked at your standings to see 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, a category that looks completely stable now and you're ignoring in your final analysis. It wasn't that way 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And if you start, even if there was a gap 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, if you started treating it as stable and ignoring it, there was enough time that you could have done damage there. So to me, this is a early September analysis or mode of analysis at best. I really avoid, other than extreme situations like noticing that you're really falling behind the pack in a category, or in a single threaded category like stolen bases or saves, that you've got either an excess or a shortfall. You can manage to that earlier, but other than that, I try to not make decisions based on categories until we get into September.
Ruvain, you mentioned Fab earlier in the podcast, and where you're looking to see what you leave. What is your general strategy? Do you like to save in order to have the hammer in the last week of the season? Obviously, it depends on need, and you could be down versus up in Fab. But how do you approach saving Fab for each of the last 2 weeks?
I try to look at my opponents first of all to see how much fab they have, and I want to have the hammer over them. I don't have to have the hammer over the whole league. I just want to have the hammer over the teams that I'm in competition with, and then I'll basically try to meet it. Figure out. Let's say give a hypothetical story here that let's say you have $20 left in Fab, and there are 2 weeks left in the season. So hypothetically, you should really be spending maybe $10 one week, $10 another week. But if you see that you need to spend extra a little here or there just because you need to get the guy above somebody else, you spend more. Try to make sure you don't have nothing left for the last week of the season, because people will get hurt, and you should leave a couple of dollars just in case you need to replace a couple of players for injury or being shut down, because you never know. But typically, you'd want to spend maybe, I'd say, a 60-40 split probably the last 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 weeks of the season, the second to last, the penultimate week, you're going to use that person for 2 weeks, as opposed to the final week, it's only one. So twice the use, I guess, should technically be twice the fab. What do you do, Ray?
Working backwards, I think for the last week, I'd like to have $5 available, because even if I don't anticipate 2 or 3 weeks in advance what the moves are going to be, we know guys are going to get shut down. There might be a need for a specific category that I don't know about. Maybe I need to go pick up Dyron Blanco or something like that just to plug him into my lineup for the last week, and I want to have a buck to do that. Or maybe there's a gem of a two-start pitcher, and that's the only thing I need, and I'll drop all $5 on that. But give me $5 for the last week just to make sure I have the flexibility to field as complete a lineup as I can, and I'll work back from there to say that leaves me with X amount more than that based on what I have left for the second to last week and the third to last week.
Yeah, and I always try to have the hammer, or at least if I can. I remember a couple years ago in Labor when Ron Chandler was playing, and going to the last week of the season, me, Ron, and Jeff Zimmerman were all within a point or so. And I was even leading at 3 p.m. on the Thursday before the end of the season. But that week, I didn't have enough fab, and I couldn't get Harrison Bader that week, who I saw the standings were close for steals, and I needed him, and I could only pay $1, but Ron had the $2, and he got him instead of me. What do you think happened in the stolen bases? We flipped 2 points swing to him, and he won by about 2 points. So it's very important to get the guys you want. So calculate really well so that you can have the hammer. I always say you got to pace yourself throughout the season, and you need to have the budget for every week. And there's always the free budget where, hey, if I need a guy, then pay it. You want to have some flexible cash to spend it, but always have the budget for the last week of the season. So if it's the $5 to make sure you can spend $4 on somebody, save that, because you never know, you might need it in the end of the season.
But use all your money. You don't get to take this money home with you.
Oh, yes.
Use it up. There's no reason why you shouldn't use it. So even if you think the bid is crazy the last couple weeks of the season, it probably isn't, because you're not taking that money home with you anyway.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You have to use it all. If you're not using it all on the last week of the season and you're not pacing yourself correctly to do it, then obviously you're doing it wrong. What about, Ruvain, what about multi-position eligible players, I should say, especially in NFBC leagues or leagues that have semi-weekly lineup settings? How important is that to have those types of players in the end of the season?
Extremely important, especially if they're getting a lot of playing time down the stretch. I'm going to talk about a few of them when we talk about our waiver wire pickups this week, but they're extremely important because just in case, you always have to have the just in case player. You can't, if you're chasing a category, let's say you're chasing RBIs, you're chasing runs, a 0 for you is a killer the last week of the season. The last week of the season. If you're down by 2 runs and you have 2 guys playing and one guy is done for the year and he's getting a complete 0, what are you going to do? You're going to say, oh, well, I should have? No, this is the time where you have to prepare. Make sure you have backups at almost every single position the last 2 weeks of the season just to make sure.
Yeah, I think it's more about having the backup at every position. Multi-position eligible players are obviously easy in that, well, you can plug them in anywhere. They're a Swiss Army knife. But if your roster is constructed in a way that you do have a backup at every position, that should do it. You agree, Ray?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a different perspective on it, actually. I've got one NFBC league where I am desperately chasing wins, which is a whole other discussion about the pros and cons of that. But I've been accumulating starting pitchers and trying to stockpile as many starts as I can for the last 2 weeks and using more and more roster spots to do it. So in doing that, I've been cutting extra hitters. But because I've got a good amount of position flexibility and multi-position eligibility on my roster, I'm only carrying one bench hitter, but I am still covered with that one bench player to sub out anyone except the catcher. And that's the benefit of having, first base outfielders and shortstop third baseman and that kind of stuff. I can pretzel around to get anybody out of my lineup that I need to except the catcher while dedicating 6 spots to extra pitchers.
Very smart. That is a very smart way to do it. Absolutely. And by the way, to remind everyone, in the last week of the season, your final fab, I would actually cut one of your pitchers and pick up at third catcher on your roster, because you never know. Your catcher can get injured Sunday night and not be playing on Monday, and that 6th pitcher doesn't help you in literally the final week of the season, but that other catcher might help you if you have to have, or not just Monday, the catcher can get injured on Tuesday, and if you have a lineup setting on Friday, well, you could use that catcher. So you definitely want to carry 3 catchers the final week of the season, right?
Or if you're carrying a catcher like JT Realmuto, who's playing a little banged up right now, once the Phillies clinch, they may clinch like with 5, 6, 7 days left in the season. If they clinch, he may be sitting the rest of the week. So even if you have him, he may have almost zero value for you, and you may want to cut him and just get any other backup catcher just in case also.
All right, anything else? Any other things that we haven't covered about strategy of what to do or not to do in the final 2 weeks of the season, Ray?
That covers most of it, I think. I mean, back to the point you were just making about extra players, you're right. Maybe, like in my team that has, is carrying 15 pitchers right now, I will cut almost all of the ones who I'm not going to use on that last Sunday, right? Because I'm obviously only going to have 9 of them active. There are no midweek pitching moves in the NFBC, so I'm not going to be able to do anything with that. I might keep 1 or 2 of them around in case rotations change on Monday and I need to make a different decision. Somebody gets scratched or something, but I don't need to be carrying 15. So sure, I'll replenish my depleted offensive bench that last Sunday night with whatever fab I happen to have left.
Yeah, exactly. That's a literal last week of the season play. But yeah, I like your strategy before, where you're carrying your pitchers and have that Swiss Army knife multi-eligible guy. That is a great thing. All right, before we go on, it's time for the Injury Guru's Trivia of the Week.
Well, the next segment of the show, we're actually going to be talking about the takeaways from this past season, 2024. So the trivia now, I'm going to be playing a little game. I don't know if you guys remember the game Card Sharks from the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, where they had a game where they put up a playing card and you had to guess whether the number after it was going to be higher or lower. So now I'm going to give you statistics from the last 3 seasons from 2022, 2023, and this year. You tell me if you think the number is going to be higher or lower for this year.
Wait,
So
was this an Alex Trebek? Did he host that?
No, Jim Perry.
No, Jim Perry, yes. Yes.
Okay.
So,
I don't know what am I thinking of? Classic concentration?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So let's start with home runs. So in 2022, there were a total of 5,215 home runs. Okay? Last year, there were 5,868 home runs. How many home runs do you think this year? Higher or lower than last year? 58 higher or lower than 5,868?
Who goes first?
Ray, you can go first.
I'm going to say lower.
Ariel?
I would have guessed lower for this year.
The answer is lower, 4,937 so far. Now, there are 2 weeks left. That number is still going to go up, but there is a significant decrease in home runs from this year to last year. Next, stolen bases. In 2022, old MLB rules, there were 2,486 stolen bases, 2,486. Last year, there were 3,503 total stolen bases. Is that number higher or lower for this year? Ariel, you go first with this one.
So I actually think I looked at this a couple weeks ago. I think the pace is actually very close, maybe slightly higher. So if I'm looking at the stats to date, it's going to be lower, but I think it's going to pass this. It's going to pass last year's total by the end of the year by just like 10 or 20 steals, if I had to guess.
Okay, Ray.
I think Ariel's right that it's pretty close. I'm going to say lower, though, that it's not quite going to get to last year's numbers.
Well, the answer is lower. Last year, again, 3,503. This year so far, 3,255.
Is that the right pace, though?
There's still
Close.
2 weeks left of the season. I mean, are there going to be another 250 stolen bases the rest of the year? I don't think so. It's still going to be less than last year.
Well, there's usually more stolen bases in September than in other months, and it used to be even more when you had the September call-ups.
So it is possible to reach that, but we'll see. Next, batting average. Now this is very interesting. In 2022, the league batting average was 243. Last year was 248 with the new rules, no shifting. What about this year? Higher or lower than 248? Ray?
I'm going to say lower.
Ariel?
Yeah, it's lower. It's lower.
It is lower. 244 average team batting average this year. What about runs? I found this very interesting. Runs. In 2022, there were over 20,800 runs scored, 20,817. Last year, 22,400 runs were scored. Higher or lower this year?
Well, if batting average and home runs
homers,
are both lower,
yeah.
I'm going to say lower.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's got to be
Yes.
lower, right?
That was the easy one. Yes.
Yeah.
It's lower by it's right there right now we're at
What about ERA? Do you know
19,375.
that one? That could be different.
Hold on. I'm doing pitching now. Now I'm doing pitching. This is what I wanted to get these stats because this is what stood out to me the most. I looked at the ERA, I looked at the WHIP. A lot of the stuff they were very close, so I wasn't even going to ask that. But what about total saves for the year? In 2022, there were 1232, 1,232 saves. Last year, there was 1241, 1,241 saves. Higher or lower for saves for this year? Ariel, you go first.
I mean, theoretically, saves are sort of randomly distributed on some percentage of the team, but uh, if I had to guess, I'd say lower, but it can't be that significant.
Okay, Ray?
Yeah, it's only the last 3 years. I would think not. I agree with Ariel. It can't be that significant, but I do think there's some factor if you look back a little bit longer term that the new extra inning rules are reducing saves from where they were probably 5 years ago.
So the answer is lower. Again, last year there were 1241. This year we stand at even 1100 right now. So right now we're still 141 saves away from catching last year.
That's
So I don't
actually
think
interesting because if the offense is lower and there's less runs scored, and the games, you would think that there should be a closer relationship between the runs scored and runs allowed per game, and that would lead to more saves, right?
but
Think
that
that.
brings me to
Maybe
my
there's more
next.
blowouts, right?
Well, this brings me to my next category: blown saves. Blown saves in
Oh,
2022, 667. Last year, 738. Higher or lower? Ray.
I'll say higher.
yeah, I
All
would say
right.
by definition higher, right?
The answer is lower.
Lower.
626 blown saves this year, which make it's really interesting. Which means that the offense is down, but there are less close games.
Probably more
Yeah, fewer
blowouts.
save situations. Yeah.
That's interesting. And one other thing I wanted to look at, and this is because I wanted to see if there's a change in the ball every year. We was wondering whether they're going to change the ball or anything. Home run to fly ball rate. Okay, home run to fly ball rate. In 2022, it was 11.4 overall in the majors. Last year, it was 12.7. So this year, was it higher or lower than 12.7 home run to fly ball rate?
It's tricky.
Lower.
I mean, are you trying to trick us here? But I mean, there's less home runs, so unless there's something freakishly off about the fly ball percentage this year, it's got to be lower, right?
It is lower. It's
Okay.
11.6, basically the same rate as 2022. So looking at these numbers, you can get some quick takeaways of what this past year has been. That offense, even though they made the changes in the rules, the offense has actually gone down a little bit. Home runs have gone down. Everything's gone and trending down. It seems like there's are sort of catching up to the hitters. Ariel and Ray. We'll start with Ray. What are your takeaways from this year?
Yeah, this is uh, the macro numbers. I think tie in a little bit with sort of my point coming at this from the other direction is I think analytically what players are doing, both pitchers and batters, is evolving so quickly. I think I've talked for a couple of years about how pitchers are constantly using data to reinvent themselves now and changing their grips and their spin rates and their arm angles and tightening their slider or turning their slider into a sweeper. All of these adjustments that pitchers can make, and they don't just make them in spring training anymore or in the offseason labs. They make them on the fly during the season and oftentimes reinvent themselves along the way. I think what I've seen this year is hitters doing the same thing more and more quickly. I mean, take the example of Corbin Carroll's crazy half season splits where he was terrible for the first half and everybody thought it was still his shoulder and that was left over from last year that was the reason why he wasn't producing, and he kept saying no, it's actually a mechanical problem. My swing isn't getting through the ball, I'm not getting the right launch angle. And you know what? He must have been right because in the second half he fixed it, and it's not like he went on the IL and got his shoulder fixed. So I think we have to take him at his word. But I think that's kind of just a microcosm of what goes on around the game these days. Is the cat and mouse game between pitchers and hitters is just changing so quickly right now. And you said a minute ago, Ruvain, about hitters being ahead of the pitchers and pitchers catching up, and this year has swung back in favor of the pitcher. I think that game is changing much more quickly than season to season now, and there are so many micro adjustments going on that we have to free ourselves of preconceived notions about what a player is because it can change on a dime.
Interesting. I'll say that with the muddier distributions, like when you have offense down and pitching. I don't know if pitching is down. I think you're getting more pitchers similar. Like I took a quick look at the distribution of roto dollars earned. I used Razzball, and there's just a couple of pitchers that have earned over 30. We're talking like Tarek Skubal, Chris Sale, Zach Wheeler. Seth Lugo is like a $27 pitcher. But there's 30 pitchers between $10 and $20. That's a lot. And that tells you that pitching is just muddier, that when you're doing your draft, you need more quantity over quality. And I think Ruben and I, we advised everybody earlier this year that the old 3-1A strategy was better. Like we're talking about guys like Zach Eflin, Logan Webb, Tanner Bybee, Justin Steele, Logan Gilbert, Framber Valdez, Max Fried. Even though those pitchers may not have all earned exactly of the dollars that you paid for them, but they all held somewhere between 50 and 75% or more of their value. And if you had 3 or 4 of them, as we did in many leagues, that was the right strategy because you have the Spencer Striders on top, who obviously were the busts, and there wasn't that many pitchers who were undrafted that really jumped up to tremendous value. Like it was about holding a lot of value, and the spread the risk of the pitchers really worked. I mean, the strategy we had was pump more dollars into pitching, but spread it more evenly to hold value. I think that really has held. And the general just value proposition on offense, that's really held. I mean, if I take a look at guys that we saw ATC showed as a value, I'm just looking at, Josh Naylor, Alec Boehm, Ryan McMahon, Taylor Ward, Ryan Mountcastle, Christian Walker, Alex Bregman, Ezekiel Tovar, Brandon Nimmo. These are all guys which, early in the season we said, those are values for ATC. Well, you're not going to get all of them in every league, but if you bet on getting a handful of them, and then you get your values at the top, your high dollar amounts at the top, just to give you overall value, you would have done well this year, going the value route in the middle, and spending less on offense because you're going to get bargains, and just throwing more into pitching. That really has shown to be the way to go, especially when wins are so fickle these days, right? I mean, I'm trying to catch people in wins, and I have a lot of Framber Valdez. Well, Ryan Presley blew the win for him today. You can't rely on wins, so don't. Get middle, get the middle relievers who are going to get vulture wins and spread it up that way. Don't go for the 7 starters, fortify that way. I think that what we told you early in the season really, really has helped. And that's what I've seen on the macro level as far as fantasy baseball this year.
Yeah, I think it's right. And on the pitching side, the trick is that there's no volume, so you can't pay for top end starters because the value proposition that made you pay for a top end starter was not only were you counting on elite ratios, but you wanted 18 wins, 200 innings, and 250 strikeouts, right? And nobody's giving you those numbers this year. The league leaders in wins are 16. There's only 3 guys in the majors right now who've thrown more than 180 innings. If you can't find volume from those guys that separates them from that next tier that you're recommending people invest in, if there's nobody on the far end of the bell curve for the counting stats, then you shouldn't pay for that.
Yeah, Logan Gilbert is 3rd in the league right now in innings pitched at 185. The dude only has 7 wins. He's 7-11. So, you can't even count on the win total from a guy who's pitching that many wins. The top guy in innings is Seth Lugo, who kept getting injured on the Mets. By the way, isn't it funny how when you leave the Mets, you get more healthy? Isn't that amazing?
You get better, yeah, typically.
Hey, he said for years, I want to start, and the Mets said, no, you can't. I think we know who was right there.
Dear Lord,
Well, speaking of the Mets, when you look at the closer market, the only real top closer that didn't get back to or close to the value is Edwin Diaz. If you would have invested in that top closer, whether it was Raisel Iglesias, whether it was a Robert Suarez paying at value, or a Raisel Iglesias who's lived up, even Josh Hader, not the amount of saves you really want for him, but the numbers were still pretty decent. If you'd have paid up for that top closer, you probably would have been near or at least in the race for saves. You wouldn't be looking in the market for many saves.
Yeah, we're definitely the save strategy was same as last year. Pay up to get that first round closer, or I'm sorry, first tier closer. Get a good value second round, and that'll be enough to get you in the pace. That definitely paying up and making sure you have those saves, not just going bargain basement with all of your 2 or 3 picks. That was definitely the right strategy. You agree?
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's going to be any different next year based on this data
Yep.
we're seeing. If you're in a straight draft, get in your first 5 rounds, get 4 bats and a closer somewhere in there, and then in rounds 6 through 10, start pounding that
Yeah.
tier of starting pitching that you were talking
Yep.
about.
Yeah.
And if you're in an auction, just allocate the same dollars accordingly.
Yeah, that's exactly the way to do it. I mean that's worked last year. It's worked this year, and I'll say that it even worked better this year because projections have now adjusted. I mean, we had so many changes over the past couple of years with the new rules, the pitch clock, with COVID, with this and that. But the change between last year and this year, there was really no change. We've had finally a stable back-to-back consecutive 2 years, and the projections have now adjusted a heck of a lot more. So the numbers and the intrinsic distributions in them were way more reliable. If that's the case going into next year, all the more reason to trust this kind of method. And exactly what Ray said, get that one closer up there, hitter, and then get the whole middle of pitching. That's really the way to go in every league.
Well, I think the one thing we're going to see changing next year is that there's not going to be a consensus number one overall pick. I think that's out the window. I think everyone's going to have their own opinion who's going to be number one next year.
Yeah, curious. Any quick thoughts on a number one? I mean, Ohtani has got to be him, right?
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, how can you not choose him? He's
Pitching?
ended up going 50-50, and he may end up pitching. And if you have him for both, I mean, how can he not be the number one overall pick?
I'll play devil's advocate. I think he would be my number one overall pick, but can he go? Can he repeat the kind of offensive year he's had, specifically the stolen bases, while carrying the additional workload of pitching? That to me is the question.
Yeah, do you think that his increase this year really had to do with the fact that he just focused on the hitting? Obviously, he's training a little bit and working himself back, but I think it has a lot to do with it that this is his focus.
Not just focus, but preservation of his body, right? Would he go and steal a base on a night when if there's 2 outs, Freddie Freeman's up, he's at first base and he's pitching? Does he take off to steal and then be like, oh, I got to go back and pitch 45 seconds after that? I mean, that's that's asking an awful lot. Or I threw 104 pitches last night. Maybe I won't maybe I won't steal 2 bases tonight.
But that's the thing. Are they going to sit him the day after he pitches or something like that? You don't know. He may lose at bats for that reason. But you can see a case for Aaron Judge being the number one overall pick. You can see a case for Bobby Witt being the number one overall pick. Not as strong as Ohtani, but it's not a consensus overall like last year.
I mean, Bobby Witt could be a case because what's the knock on him? He's just done everything he has. No injury concern. He's young. Gives you a base and everything. There's a very good case for Bobby Witt, and I can even see a case, not that I would actually do it. I have to really think myself through this one, but Ellie De La Cruz, he's not a zero in the other categories. He's not.
Nope.
And I still think batting average is still bloated. I think that's going to regress downward next year, but with the amount of homers that he hits also and the run score and everything, and just the disparity between him and the second highest stolen base guy, I mean, 60 stolen bases next year for him is not like, oh, wow, I don't know if he's going to get to 60. I think that's a possibility. That kind of lead in steals, and just in terms of roster construction, I'll say not in an auction, but in a snake draft, that makes a lot of sense,
He's like a Trey Turner of past years, where he'll
Yeah, yeah.
hit low 20 home runs, hopefully still use 60 something bases, something like that. And Trey Turner was always in the top three for most years when he was stealing all those bases. So it's I
Yeah.
think that's the best comp to him.
Because if you're in an auction, he's going to be overvalued. He just is, right? Because he's just going to go a lot, and you can piece together steals however you like down below. But if you're in a snake draft and you want to just get your stolen base, you pick him. Let's say you've got the third pick. You pick him really, really high up. Now you don't got to worry about steals at all, and that's a huge advantage in a snake draft. I'd be open to that. I have to think this through. It's still early. We're still September in 2024, but that's an interesting pick for a snake draft. Do you agree, Ray?
I agree. I think I also need to do a little more research. I'd want to model out what like you could do with 2-3 turn with Ellie, right? That becomes the key question. And I think to your point, you hit the nail on the head, Ariel. The stolen bases are such an advantage there, it's worth considering. But can you find not just power bats to go with him on that 2-3 turn, but also batting average to build you the batting average cushion that starting with Witt or starting with even Otani would give you relative to Ellie? That's my question. I don't have
Yeah,
the answer yet, but
yeah.
that's the legwork I would need to do to answer the question this offseason.
But we've also discussed in past years, about the risk of Otani getting hurt as a pitcher. Because if he gets hurt as a pitcher, he may be out as a hitter also, depending on the injury. So, there's double risk with taking him if he's going to be pitching next year.
Yeah. I'll also predict that the number of starters that go in the first two rounds are going to go down. It just has to. I mean, who's the top guy this year? Scooble, sure, he'll be in the top. Chris Sale, you never know what the injury of the guy is. He going to be reliable? I don't know. Spencer Strider, you're going to rely on him coming off of and giving whatever he gives. There's just going to be less reliable options, and with all the advice we're giving you about the muddiness, I think you're going to see far fewer starting pitchers go in the first two rounds. We're going back to like 8-9 years ago. We're going back to that scenario. It's really come full circle, I think.
I hope the marketplace does not agree with you, Ariel.
and keep the advantage. That's definitely the way to do it. All right, let's do a couple of waiver wire picks before we end here. Ray, who's a waiver wire pick that you're interested in for this coming week?
I've got my eye on a couple of guys who just are arriving in the majors, but look like they're going to get a decent amount of playing time over the next 2 weeks in audition. My first one is Jordan Adams from the Angels, who's just called up when Joe Adell went on the DL, and he should be in the outfield just about every day down the stretch. Brings both power and speed to the table, and really could, if he plays a lot, we never really know how these guys are gonna make their initial transition to the majors, but Adams already hit a home run the other night, and if he can transition smoothly, there might be 50, 60 plate appearances where he could give you both a smattering of power and speed over the last couple of weeks.
Ruvain?
I got a couple plays. I have two pitchers and two hitters, actually. The hitters, position eligibility. That's what you're looking for the last couple weeks of the season. Andres Chaparro of the Nats, he's first base and third base eligible in the last week. He's batting 304 with 2 homers and a stolen base. He's only 14% owned in CBS. You need a corner guy, first base, third base. You don't know whether or not Jaime Candelario is going to come back or not. He's the guy, you can pick up and plug in because he's going to get his playing time. And the Met, Jose Iglesias, second base, shortstop, third base eligible. Only 11% of CBS leagues have him owned. He's playing almost every day now since Jeff McNeil went out with a wrist fracture. He comes in as defense for the third base for Mark Vientos later in the game. He's batting 389 over the last week. He doesn't hit that much with much power, but he's a good guy for filler if you need batting average. And the two pitchers I want to mention, Tyler Kinley. He's a closer for the Rockies. He's only 9% owned, and just so you know, he only has 3 more road games this year. So all the rest of the games are going to be at home. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about getting a closer for Tyler Kinley. He only has 3 more road games, and they happen to be at LA. So I don't know if you want to grab him or not, but if you need saves, that's a guy. And another Tyler Holton. He has given up. This is the guy I picked up in GDD last week because I had a hunch on him. He's given up one earned run in his last 14 appearances. He's pitching for the Surgeon Tigers right now. He's only got a 6.9 K per nine, but he's got a 2.23 and a .79 ERA and WHIP for the season. So he's a guy, like I mentioned, you want a middle inning guy who may vulture wins. He vultured a win this week. He may do it again next week.
And as far as the closer, though, I disagree. That I think I mean, Kinley is a fine pick if you need saves, but I think it's better to be on the road if you're a closer. I think you get more than if.
Yes, which is why I was giving that caveat that he only has 3 more road games and everything else is at home.
Yeah, right. I'll mention just a couple people with not much detail though. Johnny DeLuca, if deep league and desperate for steals, think of him. Ty France, he's looking more like Ty France of a couple years ago. That batting average is shooting up. Better ballpark now. Ty France is interesting. Trevor Story's back. Who the hell knows? Ozzy Albies, I mentioned him earlier. That's a dart. Seth Brown, power potential down the stretch, maybe. And Matt Wallner is on fire right now. I would consider Matt Wallner. Anybody else ready to add?
I'll throw one more in. You mentioned a while back that matchups are everything in these last 2 weeks. So I'll throw another Angel. Starting pitcher Jake Kakanowitz. Both of his last 2 starts are slated to be against the White Sox.
Doesn't get much better than that. I mean, would you pick up Ariel Cohen if he had to face the White Sox?
I might very well.
Yeah.
Especially given your ERA of late.
Are you going to pitch 5 innings? That's all you need is 5 innings. Are you going to get through 5 innings?
There you go. All right, a quick pitcher preview. Any other pitchers to pick up? I'll just say a couple first to start it out. Texas, I find it interesting. We have the former people who were in the Mets organization all on Texas now. Kumar Rocker, I don't know. It's just interesting to see. Maybe he'll get another start or not. I don't know. Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer. It's possible that they're available on your waiver wire if you play in a limited IL league. Those are definitely interesting. I don't know how long they'll go, but I don't know. I'll take a couple strikeouts from deGrom. He looks so far good in rehab. Reed Detmers, I picked him up in GDD with Derek Hardy, and we didn't start him. Oh, boy. He had a great start this past week, and he's 2-start. White Sox in Houston. Again, if you want to win this week, Reed Detmers is really the way to go. Aaron Savali, 2-start. He's been pitching better as of late versus Philly and Arizona. It's tough matchups, but he has been better lately, and 2-start is interesting. How about Kiter Montero? Complete game shutout last week. I know that it was against Colorado, but he's at Baltimore this week, and the final week he's slated against, drumroll please, the White Sox. So got to consider that one. And how about Mets Tyler McGill versus Washington versus Philadelphia, 2-start week. He's been pitching also very decent lately. That could be a play for wins as the Mets are hot and trying to make the playoffs, which is I can't believe they're in it. I'm super happy.
Yeah, I'll throw on your theme of guys who might have been dropped in limited IL leagues. Both Yamamoto and Yu Darvish are back and looking relatively healthy, and I think also both line up for 2 starts next week. So throw them on the pile as well.
And I'll add Bailey Falter, who's a possible 2-start this coming week against at St. Louis and at Cincinnati. He's been good last couple of starts. He's gone a total of 16 in the third innings in his last 3 starts, so he's a possibility to get you a win. And 2 guys who are 1-start this week, but possible 2-start the following week. So you may want to think about doing that. Get the future 2-start for the last week of the season. And that's one of them is Jose Quintana. He's only 42% owned in CBS leagues. He's playing Washington this week, and he's a possible 2-start the last week of the season. He's been lights out recently, so he's been really, really good. So he's a guy you want to think about. And another guy in the Pirates, Luis Ortiz. He's also been pretty good. He's 1-start this week against the Cardinals, but he's a possible 2-start to end the season.
All right, Ruvain, what about your final regular season injury update of the season for us?
Okay, so I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm just going to mention the guys who I know for sure are out for the season and guys who are probably not going to come back, and there's a good chance you may not get much value out of them. First of all, the guys out for the season, I mentioned Jeff McNeil, fractured wrist. Chas McCormick has a hand fracture. James Paxton with a calf injury. He also is announcing that he's retiring as well. Jordan Romano's gone. Jesus Luzardo, Luis Rengifo, Yimi Garcia, Drew Thorpe, Joe Adell. All these guys are gone. They can all be dropped. You can have no issue dropping them if you haven't dropped them already. Other guys that you may want to think about dropping because you don't know whether they're going to come back. Brian Hayes. I mean, we mentioned about him not even having him on your roster anymore. He may come back the last week of the season. We'll see. Max Meyer. He has got a shoulder injury. He may have one start when he comes back. I don't know why the Marlins would bring him back for one more start, so he's probably going to be done. Kodai Senga is interesting. They said the Mets may bring him back the last week of the season as a reliever, so he may pitch in high leverage reliever situations last week of the season. He may be a sleeper to get the last week of the season. Anthony Rendon, well, he's Anthony Rendon. Matt McClain, he's possible to come back the last week of the season. I don't know why he would. Maybe just because he wants to show that he can play, just like Noah Syndergaard did a couple of years ago. And I mentioned Heimer Candelario. He's got a left toe fracture. He still has some pain in that toe. You don't know whether he's going to come back or not. And the Reds are not in a race, so he may not come back.
I'm really bummed about Jeff McNeil, and my son, who named his fantasy team the Flying Squirrels, he's bummed too. And I'm like, well, you got to cut him. He's like, I'm not cutting him. He's the name of my team. What advice should I tell him?
Don't start him. That's all.
That's good advice.
He knows
Just
that.
Don't start him.
He knows that. But,
That's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the end of our show. This was a good one. A lot of great strategy. Thank you so much, Ray, for coming on the show. Ray, do you want to just tell everyone what's going on with you with Baseball HQ and everything you're doing in fantasy?
Yeah, so we talked about First Pitch Arizona at the top. Let's talk about that again. That's October 31st through November 3rd out in Phoenix. We do still have seats available, so visit Baseball HQ. There's a First Pitch Arizona logo on our homepage. You can follow for all the details there. And another couple of weeks, we'll be getting into the mode of producing the 2025 baseball forecaster, too. So that's the coming attraction for me.
Is that a lot of work?
A little bit.
Good stuff. If you haven't gotten the forecaster, you definitely should. You're missing out on what some people call the Bible. I have my first 4 Bibles that I bought signed by Ron Chandler, and I'm not going to sell those.
Collector's items. Got to hang on to them.
Collector's items, yeah. I stopped having him sign them when I actually played in a league against him. I figured that, I can't have him say good luck in sign the book if I'm playing against him. And then he beat me in that league that year, so that wasn't good.
Maybe he should have signed it then.
Maybe I should have had it signed then.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's the story for you guys. Ruben, what about you? What's going on with you?
You can follow me on Twitter, X, at MLB Injury Guru, where I'm tweeting out these injury updates as they come, when the players are not playing anywhere and everything like that. You can catch all these injuries as well as many others in my article, our weekly article for Roto Bowler. There are 2 more articles for this year, so catch them, and hopefully you'll be able to read them next year as well.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can see my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, ATCNY on Twitter/X, and of course right here on the Beat the Shift podcast each and every week. Until now, this is the last regular season podcast we're going to do, which is why we did the last 2 week strategy. Ruben and I will do one off-season podcast to recap the season once it's done, and then after that, the following one will be live from Arizona at First Pitch, so we're really excited for that. All right, well, thanks everyone for listening once again. Hopefully you've gotten great advice through the show here and that you are kicking butt in your league. Good luck to you for the last 2 weeks of the season. Once again, thank you so much to Ray Murphy for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.